So the time comes when the individual steps out on his own. Now, in the history of civilization, the decline of the mysteries, which was never complete, there have always been some secret organizations survive, but in general, the decline of the mysteries occurred in order that the individual could develop the personal strength to regulate his own destiny. It was done because he had to gradually take hold of his own integrities. He could not be good because somebody put a gun to the back of his neck. He had to be right because right was right. He had to control himself from within himself and develop those virtues through his own insights, which had previously been supplied in form of parental or environmental protection. So out of this came gradually a new order of learning, a learning in which the individual became the master of his own destiny, the type of learning that resulted gradually in the rise of humanism, the rise of the right of the individual. The individual had to provide for his own needs, had to gain the insights necessary to protect his own character, had to apply from his own wisdom the rules and laws which had previously been administered by the mystery institutions. Our own national existence is a case in point. We were required to move from a colonial state to a free and independent people, which meant that we had to take over the administration of our own destiny. Nature wants this. Nature is not going to permit us to be forever adolescent. But where an individual faced with the responsibility for his own destiny remains an adolescent, then the system falls apart. We must face the problem of maturity. Now, maturity is a very subtle thing. Nobody seems to know exactly what the word means. Maturity to most individuals is the attainment of voting age. When a person is old enough to vote, or old enough to get into the army and die for his country, he is an adult. Also, as soon as he begins to look like an adult, he is mistaken for one. After he becomes a little more adult and shows a few patriarchal propensities, then he is mistaken for a wise man or woman. We assume age to have something to do with maturity. It has, but only under one condition, that the years that it took to get older were used to become wiser. If this was completely neglected, the individual can pass to the grave at 90 or 100 and still be an adolescent. An adolescent is one who lives without the realization of his own responsibilities, without knowledge or acceptance of his own duties in the community in which he lives. And the most adolescent of all is the one who thinks he's here merely to get what he can. Now, when adolescents of this kind teach younger adolescents, adolescence as a fact becomes supreme. We have to accept the problems of maturity. Maturity is vision, thoughtfulness. Maturity is the willingness to sacrifice freedom for right, and if necessary, to give up our personal privileges in the protection of our common good. Now, we have this problem with our gasoline situation. I'm not going to try to philosophize on it, because I don't think anybody seems to know what it's all about. Not completely. But we have a reasonable realization that there is some truth behind it. The great truth being that no matter who is responsible for the present crisis, this earth is a bottle, so far as petroleum is concerned. It's a round job. And sometime we're going to scrape the bottom of it. This oil supply cannot be replenished by nature at the speed in which it is being taken out of the ground by man. So someday we're going to have not only shortage, but a very desperate lack of fuel. Whether it's now or 50 years from now, it's going to come someday because of inevitables. And therefore, arrangements must be made to find other sources for fuel. We will. We have the ingenuity and the skill, but the transitional periods will be difficult and always have to be. Now we can see right now what the attitude is in general. A pandemonium caused by this shortage, which interferes with almost everything that we do. Somewhere along the line, it might be wise to realize how vulnerable we are, and that we have this vast, complicated structure of civilization which can be ruined by a little pollution in the air, can be ruined by contamination of water, and can be ruined by lack of fuel and energy power. We have this tremendously vulnerable thing that we have built higher and higher, and our entire survival depends upon insecure factors. The answer, of course, has to be that we will adjust as graciously as possible to the needs of the time. We will have to begin to recognize that this program of expansion and exploitation cannot go on forever. The sooner we stop it, the less painful it will be. If we wait till a common emergency forces it, the result may be devastating. Self-discipline, right here now, is one of the factors. Self-discipline against the impulse to profit from emergencies. Self-discipline to prevent us from trying to dominate a situation and take that which belongs to someone else. Self-discipline in the moderate use of whatever we have so that its values and virtues can be expanded as long as possible. The constant removal of values, this constant destruction of ordinary implements, of ordinary commodities, the commodity that is created to wear out as soon as possible. All these things are basically destroying our natural resources. So the person has a right to live as nearly adequately as possible. But above adequacy, he must begin to discipline. When he has what he needs and reasonable luxuries that are not dangerous to his survival, this is as far as he can go. And beyond this point, he is tearing down the structure of his entire social order. So freedom here, again, has to be controlled. Freedom to do as you please must mean that we please to do what is right. And in small things, we can all practice this, even though we are not able, perhaps, to immediately change governmental patterns. Confucius died of a broken heart in China, and among his last words were that he found no prince who would accept his teaching and live by it. But after him came others who greatly revered and venerated those teachings, and they became one of the imperishable codes of conduct, and are even being brought back in China today. So everywhere it is hard to influence other people. to do the things that we know to be right. But we are able to have greater influence than we suspect. What is not good, we should not support. We do not have to go into violent revolutions or anything of that nature. But when it is obvious that we are wasting, we can stop wasting. When we are being deceived or exploited, we can decline to cooperate. It may mean that we will have to go without something that we want. But if enough people go without something that they want, they will ultimately have that which they want more, that which is better for them. And this is true in all the fields in which we are supporting bad policies. Another form of bondage to freedom is in the level of ideas within ourselves. Within each of us, there seems to be a series of different governments functioning at the same time. We are a monarchy, and this monarchy is a spiritual power within us which rules by divine right. We are an oligarchy in which various functions of the body become the rulers of it. And these various functions, like communities within a state, have a certain autonomy. And in oligarchy in our bodies, the higher faculties of the body, the highest structural systems of the body, become the lawful leaders, so that the body is governed by its own aristocracy, and that is oligarchy. The body is also ruled to a certain degree by a theocratic system. The king is also the high priest. The theocratic system is that the power within man be regarded not only as a great life and energy principle, but as a divine being. And under this divine being, the king emperor becomes the theocratic ruler. We are also a democracy. A democracy rising from the different levels of our own interests and our own abilities. Democracy does not bestow upon us equality. It does bestow upon us equal opportunity to fulfill our own natural destinies. Democracy is to essential principles a government by the permission of the governed. But when we study man, we're not sure we find it there even. I wonder how many of us are governed with the consent of the capillaries, the limbs, whether we are governed by the consent of the heart or the liver. When it comes to these things, we are a tyranny in which willpower gives us the advantage and enables us to destroy ourselves. So we are tyrannies also. The tyranny of ambition in ourselves, and its right to destroy the body, destroy the mind, destroy the heart. Then we are also a communism in our own bodies. And that is what might be termed an industrialized state. A state in which all the parts of the economy, which we call the body, are held in servitude to the creation of the superior self. In other words, what we are really doing is to use all our faculties and powers industrially to support the purposes of the will or of the mind. The mind makes us work, and in turn the mind gains the benefits of our labors. so that everything except the mind is a slave, existing primarily to provide that which the appetites desire. Then, of course, we are subject to revolutions. Every so often, a system is so badly abused that there is a revolt. And in this we have a parallel to the French Revolution, the Russian Revolution, the Chinese Revolution, and the American Revolution. Weary of tyranny, the body rebels. When this happens within the body of the individual, we call it a breakdown. We go to the hospital as a nervous wreck. The body no longer able to stand the intemperances of its rulers, and the faculties and facilities of the body being constantly exploited to gratify the divine right of princes, our ambitions. Finally, there is a revolution. And in this revolution, we turn the structure inside out or upside down. And we start over again. And after a revolution, we come out of the hospital with a strong resolution to live well. And in 3 months, completely forget it. Now, we also have a socialism. And socialism in the body is that the body should produce all that is necessary, and that this necessity should be distributed throughout all the parts of the body, so that nothing is lacking that is necessary. And above a certain point, all production by the individual parts should be pooled or made into an available reservoir for the advancement of culture. In other words, there should be a limit upon the industrial expansion of the individual or his institutions. He should do a certain amount, and the overage should all go into a common fund for the common good. There is a single taxer and a mugwump in each one of us, all hard at work doing something. And then every once in a while there comes along something that is pure anarchy. And anarchy is the rebellion of the individual against his own needs. And anarchy is that the individual says, I shall do as I please regardless of what it costs. It may destroy health, it may break home, it may alienate children, it may destroy the country, but I shall do what I please. And what do I please to do? I please to run other people. I want to use all my resources to dominate someone else. This individual is going to find his anarchy falls apart, because in the last analysis, the only person he can ever actually dominate is himself. When he tries outside of himself, there's a revolution. Now, revolution has been the pet way in which human beings have tried to grow for a long time. And one of the things that you look back over history and you realize that in many instances, revolutions have been so unnecessary. Nearly everything that a revolution accomplishes would have occurred of its own accord within 50 to 100 years because of the inevitable motion of civilization itself. The tyrannies which we rise against would have ironed themselves out. Not right immediately, but in the course of time. Growth would have overcome. But instead of having revolution as a means of change, we're gradually going to be taught that we can't afford them. Now, it used to be that we couldn't afford them for moral reasons. But then morality fell apart, and then something else came along. Now we can't afford them because we haven't the energy resources to sustain them. In the future, revolutions are going to take more petroleum than we have. They're going to take more of other things. We're going to devastate and destroy the crops. We're going to make our land unsuitable for tillage for centuries. Little by little, the revolution theory is destroying itself. It is a monster like the serpent of old that swallows its own tail. Instead of that, we must have the next step, and the only positive step, and that is not revolution, but revelation. We must begin to understand. In order to understand, we have to plan some way of creating within ourselves the capacity to understand. We can get it in various ways. One way we can get it is by simply reading history. We can see what has happened to those who didn't understand. And as we find in reading Gibbon's Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire, which most people really should read, I strongly advise it, because it is the nearest thing to an absolute parallel to our present situation. It is exactly the same in principle. The Roman Empire fell for the same reason that we are trying valiantly to destroy our own way of life. But we can, from learning, perhaps from Spengler's Decline of the West, or other good texts that are coming out now, realize our mistakes. We can realize that it is not going to be through violence and not through dependence upon political reform changes are going to come. They're going to come by the individual becoming more enlightened. In order to have an enlightened government, you must have enlightened people who not only are enlightened enough to elect a good government, but are enlightened enough to be good governors when they are elected. You can't just drift this situation. So the problem of revelation comes through the individual waking up. Revelation is an awakening. It is a becoming aware. It is beginning to see into things instead of their surfaces only. It is the beginning of a responsible relationship with existence. Revelation shows us what is expected, what is demanded, and what is inevitable in a universe governed by absolute law. But Revelation shows that this law is not only legistic, it is also very deeply, emotionally constructive. Law is not only a legal code, but it is a basic relationship based upon love of God and love of our fellow men. So love is part of law. And without love, law can never be fulfilled. But without law, love can never be brought to fruition. These things are related. And it is only self-discipline that keeps us in harmony with law. And it is also self-discipline that perfects love. These things are intimately interrelated. So in this search for the solution, we have to begin with the problem of our own nature. We've had a stream of dictators lately that have drenched the earth with blood. And these dictators have nearly always been usurpers of some kind. They are people that have risen up to, in many cases probably, to accomplish what they believe to be a useful change in society. Napoleon was one of those who had a divinity complex. He believed that God had appointed him to save the world. There is no doubt in the world that Mussolini had the same type of attitude, and so did Hitler. They were strangely imbalanced mystics who felt in some way the pressure of a destiny. Of course, we can hardly say that Karl Marx was dominated by the God complex, but he also regarded himself as a man of destiny, but without permission of deity, because he probably gravely doubted the existence of deity. But all these people, of various reasons, at various times in their careers, really believed they were doing something to help people. Now bring this now into yourself. somewhere in yourself is this dictatorial factor. It's usually located somewhere between the ears. This faculty is the part that determines what is good. Now, most people start out in families and in relationships. They want to do what is good. They want to help people to be better. But it's hard to help people to be better when you do not know what better is yourself. So better nearly almost always means conformity. To conform with what the better thinking person thinks better is. And it ends in tyranny. It ends in one superstition being imposed upon another. And where the blind lead the blind, they all fall in the ditch together. So to work with this tyranny that is within ourselves, we have to educate it. Nearly all the dictators have been badly educated. They've had very little experience with value. An individual who is educated but locked within his own attitudes can be in the same condition. He is in this condition because although he has a proper background for learning, he has never used it. He has subjected his background of learning to the foreground of his own opinion. If we are then trying to work to solve this problem in ourselves and in society, we come around finally to the realization that something has to open up the inner life of the individual. Now let's bring that down to our present situation also. In the last 10 years, the world in general has changed its attitude toward knowledge very substantially. It has been a period of astonishing religious renaissance. More and more people have turned to some kind of faith. 25 years ago, religion was regarded as little better than a superstition. Today, religion is spreading in every part of the world because revolutions are beginning to add up to revelations. The individual and the collective together must realize that violence is no solution, but that the answer to all problems lies in the recognition of the spiritual foundation of society. One of the reasons, perhaps, that we have had some new attitudes on these things has been the importation of other religions from other parts of the world. We've at last come to the realization that no one religion is the only one, and that from other religions we can learn much, but at the same time can stay with our own if we so desire. It doesn't mean that we have to be a traitor to one belief in order to join another. This influx of foreign religions has brought with it a strong mystical overtone. For most of these faiths are far more mystical than ours at the present time. Another situation has developed that is important, and that is that science, having become practically at the end of its resources as far as further explorations are concerned, has begun finally to systematically examine the internal life of the human being. Science is now beginning to work with the extrasensory perception bands. It is working with all kinds of man's internal experience phenomena, and is beginning to recognize that until it understands man's mystical constitution, it can never produce a truly workable psychotherapy. We will never have a true psychology until the individual is able to explore and classify the internal phenomena of his own consciousness. Now, ulterior motive creeps in on this also. Some of this research is now being intended primarily for exploitation. And the various schools that are claiming it are some of them already falling into exploiting techniques. But the major over-pattern is very good. It is that man is beginning to recognize what he forgot 2,000 years ago, and that is the mystery of his own inner life. He is beginning to restore the structure of the mysteries and their philosophies and their teachings. A simple example has been acupuncture, which came in as a superstition and is now established as a valid form of science. We are suddenly beginning to realize the fact that our ancestors long ago were not fools. There's a man by the name of Salvertes who wrote a book, and in it he attempted to expose the miracles of antiquity. They were all frauds. But in order to explain them and maintain his own point of view, he had to create an antiquity as highly advanced in science as we are today, because to produce the phenomena without metaphysical means required advancement of science beyond anything that we know. So he caught himself in his own trap. He points out, for example, that the ancients had androids, statues that spoke, moved, and performed services. They had talking heads that could add up complicated digital numbers. In other words, they had a primary computer, long before we believed there were such things. One of the early kings of Rome, who lived more than 1000 B.C., was killed by an electrical experiment in his own laboratory. These people knew drugs. They knew all the drugs that we now use in psychotherapy. They had all kinds of magnetic and electric devices. And in order to prove his point, he made the ancients so smart that we never will catch up with them. But the point that is perhaps valid from both points of view is that in those days, all of this knowledge was concentrated in a group of persons who were able to direct it for the common good and prevent its misuse by oaths and obligations. So that during that entire period of time, there is no evidence that the sciences of antiquity were exploited in the same degree that modern sciences are exploited today. It is again a question of the individual gradually making the changes in himself that are necessary. The modern trend in metaphysics could result, and probably will result, in the gradual unfoldment of those parts of man's own internal nature which will ultimately free him from all pollution, from all exploitation, from the danger of nuclear warfare, and all of this type of thing. He can release from within himself everything that is necessary for his physical security, and at the same time free his consciousness for the advancement of knowledge. This was Lord Bacon's dream, that in the end, all science would free individuals from the responsibilities resulting from abuse and ignorance, that science would rescue the person from the dilemma of his own mistakes. But this can only come when science stops making the mistakes also. And it can only do this when it has become ensouled. And modern science exploring into the mysteries of life, energy, time, matter, spirit, mind, all of these things, science goes on, it's going to discover some answers. And as it discovers these, it will begin to regain what it had in the beginning, the realization that all science is a science of understanding the nature and function of deity. When this time comes and these things are seen in this way, we will be able to accomplish much more than we have ever accomplished before. And the first step that we probably should begin to take is to realize what is intended, and whether it is in this present embodiment or in some future life. Each of us has to be part of this great plan of human regeneration. And in order to do it, we can start now on the process of disciplining our faculties and gaining the freedom that comes from being free from our own mistakes. When we do this, we will have a very much better time. And we will find that there is no end in sight that will block the universe or destroy it, because all of its true values are immortal and indestructible. And only thing that we can destroy in the long run is ignorance. We can only destroy destructiveness itself. And out of that will come the answers to the things we want. And when that time comes, and we are citizens of a better world, it will be necessary for us to be better citizens. For we cannot administer the fairness, the equality, the integrity that is gradually unfolding through humanity unless as individuals we can stand firm for principles at all times and become worthy of the securities that we hope to attain. Well, that's all for the morning, folks.